Hello Street Snappers, Brian here with another video where I'm going to take a batch of your great questions. If you're into street photography and new to this channel, please do hit the subscribe button and also the little notification bell so you won't miss out on any future content. So let's go straight to the first question, which is from Adam Ramjean. And Adam says, before you leave the house, what checklist do you run through and what research do you do in advance? I guess if it's somewhere new, there may be more research, but even for London, would you research weather, events, etc.? So what do I do before I leave the house? What prep do I do? So it's an interesting question, Adam, and I guess the answer could depend on a number of factors. Sometimes I'll decide to dedicate the day to a specific project and I'll be totally focused on that project. So take my ongoing Soho project, for example. I already know the area like the back of my hand, so it's usually a case of just hunting the streets for material. Or maybe I've made a note from a previous trip, maybe to visit a certain spot at a certain time of day because the light will be just right there. But I'll always have a good idea about what the weather's doing. There are lots of good apps out there. I use the Dark Sky app, which is usually pretty helpful, and I'll pop a link in the box below. I've probably worked out in advance where the good light is going to be on the day. But when it comes to projects, the research happens long before. And by the time I come to be out there doing the shooting, I've already got the topic thoroughly researched. You mentioned events. If there's an event happening, I might make a note to swing by and have a look, but I'm not really drawn to mass gatherings. There are too many people, too many photographers, and you tend to get too many samey shots. So the short answer is I'll do as much prep as I possibly can before leaving home, and I will generally have an idea what I'm going to be doing and looking for on the day. So on to the next question, which is from Barry Bottomley. I often suffer from blurred thought when trying to decide about the boundaries between street photography and urban landscape. Do you have any suggestions as to when urban landscape photography moves too far from comfortably existing side by side with street? Okay, Barry, interesting question. I don't think there are any clearly defined boundaries between street and urban landscape. And I think the distinction becomes a matter of personal choice or preference. But for me, street photography is all about a candid moment. And with urban landscapes, it's more about the environment. And the two can coexist together. But look at these two shots, for example. I see lots of street photographers taking exactly these scenes, and it feels more urban landscape than street to me. The people act as a kind of visual punctuation mark, adding a touch of humanity to the landscape, maybe a sense of scale, but they don't serve any other purpose than an aesthetic one. So I would put this kind of street photography in, it's kind of on the borders of urban landscape. Maybe it is urban landscape. But then you look at a frame like this one, and the people are an essential part of the composition, even though there's no moment as such, but they are part of the composition. But having said all that, labels are not always helpful, and the grey area between the two genres is actually quite big, and the boundary can be very blurred. And personally, I think you should just do what you enjoy doing, forget labels, make great pictures, and the name tags will look after themselves. I hope that helps. So, next question. And this is from James Cooper. I'm a newcomer to street photography and photography generally. Aside from getting out to shoot as much as possible, would you say it's a good idea to focus on projects in order to develop a sense of style, rather than just aim and shoot at things that capture your attention? The short answer, James, is absolutely yes. And whilst a big part of street photography is reacting to what's going on around us, projects can give us a real sense of purpose and direction. And I feel very strongly about this. So I'm always working myself on 5 or 6 projects at any given point in time. And I could go on all day about this, but maybe the most helpful thing I can do is point you to a recent video I did that looks at projects in much more depth, and there's a link up here. So as I'm walking the streets, I probably have all my current projects running through my mind, but that won't be at the expense of being tuned into what's going on around me and just ready to record any kind of random incident. So it's a bit of a mixture of the two things. So next question is from Antonio, who is from Latina in Italy. And Antonio says, this is all about settings. When you set the camera to a 250th of a second, f8 and ISO auto, will you use the matrix metering method? So Antonio is talking about what I call my walk around settings here, and I set the camera to a 250th, f8 and auto ISO most of the time. So these are pretty much my standard settings. And as for metering modes, what do I think? I'm all for keeping it as simple as possible. And I will nearly always use matrix metering, or whatever your particular camera system calls it. Now, I know some street photographers use spot metering, which is great if you have the luxury of time. But for the kind of street photography I do, I don't have that luxury, and I've got to be a bit quicker and more nimble. So for all intents and purposes, Antonio, yeah, matrix metering is absolutely fine. So Tim Roberts has the next question, and Tim says, is it ever acceptable to have blown highlights, and if so, in what circumstances? Define acceptable. I think that if blown highlights add to the image in some way, then it's fine. But then I guess we need to remember that street photography is not about perfection. And I tend to look at the content first, technical proficiency second. And I don't think blown highlights would necessarily kill an image off for me, particularly if you had a strong image to start with, okay? But having said that, there's no reason you couldn't have blown highlights, as maybe as a deliberate creative effect, such as with this shot where the blown highlights helped emphasize the silhouette. So that was a deliberate thing. So yes, you can have blown highlights. Focus on getting the picture. The technical stuff will usually look after itself. Next question from another Tim, and this is Tim Beckervase. What are your thoughts on the use of film simulation? Is it an approach you regularly take when out on the streets? It's a really interesting one, this, Tim. Film simulations can be great. And I know that several camera brands now offer them, although I can only really talk about my experience with the Fujifilm simulations, which I do think are great, by the way. But I tend to shoot RAW plus JPEG. I then usually just work on the RAW file and forget the JPEG. But the reason I shoot the JPEG is because A, it's comforting to have a backup in case anything goes wrong. But B, I usually set that JPEG to monochrome using one of the film simulations. And in the case of, in my case, I set it to Fujifilm Acros, which gives me quite a gritty, contrasty look. And the main reason I do that is because it will give me a black and white preview in my viewfinder or on my LCD screen. And this allows me to compose more efficiently. I'm a much better composer in black and white than I am in colour. You don't have the distractions of colour. You can see the composition more effectively. But most importantly, this black and white view will help me evaluate the light much more effectively. So the short answer is yes, I do use film simulations, but probably not for the reasons you'd expect. So the final question is from Neil Goodwin, who has a philosophical question. And Neil says, looking ahead 5 years, what do you see as the main changes in street photography, if any? Well, that's a really interesting one, Neil. To start with, I think there could be changes in the legal framework, with the privacy laws tightening up significantly, and our freedom to shoot may be being gradually eroded away, and you can see this happening in some countries. I hope I'm wrong, but I just get the feeling that things might get slightly less comfortable for street photographers, but hey, who knows? Regulation's becoming a bigger part of most aspects of life, and I don't think what we do will be any different, particularly as we follow America and becoming a more litigious society. Then I think there'll be massive technological changes with bigger sensors going into smaller cameras, recording even more detail, producing even bigger files, maybe also allowing us to operate a bit more stealthily, if we think we need to, but I'm not sure that we do. I think the moving image will have a bigger part to play in street photography, and maybe even becoming an established part of the street photography landscape, though I'm not sure that it should. Then you've got the usual fashions or trends that come and go in street photography, and I think even Madame Lavinia, the gypsy fortune teller on Blackpool Pier, couldn't predict these. But having said that, I'm really pleased to see a rising incidence in documentary photography, particularly over the last 12 months. And you see incidences of documentary coming back into street much more strongly. And I'm really hoping this isn't just a transient phase and it's something that's here to stay. But hey, we'll see. Well, that's just about wraps up today's session. So huge thanks for all those who submitted questions. If you have a question for the next Q&A video, please pop it in the comments box below. If you found this video useful, it would be great if you could hit the like button. And again, please do subscribe to the channel. It really helps. So stay tuned for more street photography videos, and I hope to see you again next time. Thanks.